Well, let's go ahead and get back into the book of Revelation. Does anybody have any questions left over from last week? I hope everyone's getting somewhat of a picture of at least how this is, how the book unfolds on this particular view. Remember that I would guess that the historical view, and of course the radical preterist as well as the moderate preterist, and the idealist view, certainly. One thing that they all have in common is they recognize that the literature in the book of Revelation is actually visionary literature that's highly symbolic and is not necessarily to be taken literally or to have a one-to-one correspondence in reality. The symbols certainly mean something, and they're certainly pointing to something, but if you have 10 horns, for instance, you don't necessarily have to, as you see the description of the beast, believe that such a beast is going to rise out of the ocean someday, or that it did in the past that looks like that. But each of the features of the beast has a particular meaning to it. The horns meaning authority, the diadems, crowns, the heads in this case meaning hills, and also Caesars or kings that lived during that time frame. One thing the dispensational view does is it takes things as literally as possible. As a matter of fact, they would state up front that is their working assumption. Literal wherever possible, and when you can't take it literally, when it just makes no sense, then you'll take it figuratively. And I would suggest that you do it just the opposite. When you come to visionary literature, you basically take it as non-literal, unless you have to take it literally, because visionary literature is full of symbols and images and things that represent things that aren't those things themselves, but point to those things. So we saw how that worked with the beast last week, and we'll do a little bit of reviewing on that. But first, let's read the text that we're going to look at this morning, which is Revelation chapter 13, verses 11 through 18. One other thing I would remind you at the outset, and this is the thing that keeps, no matter how much difficulty you have with the symbols and whether you think the explanation that those that hold to a moderate preterist view, whether you think that really satisfies what those symbols mean, the one thing that keeps pointing us back to 70 A.D., of course, are the time frame references that John makes in the book that indicates that whatever it is he was talking about, the time was very near, not to seal up the words of this prophecy because these things were going to happen very soon. So John expected them to happen in his day, and he was warning the churches he was writing to listen, to heed what's being said because the time is near. So even if these explanations may not satisfy you, you need to realize that whatever it is that they're pointing to happened in John's day. All right, well, let's get into this text then, Revelation 13, 11 through 18. This is talking about the second beast, or the land beast, the beast that rises from the land. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. He exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and he makes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose fatal wound was healed. He performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down out of heaven to the earth in the presence of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which it was given him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast, who had the wound of the sword and has come to life. And it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast would even speak and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And he causes all, the small and the great, the rich and the poor, and the free men and the slaves, to be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. And he provides that no one will be able to buy or to sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. Again, we've already looked at what the number means and that type of thing, but let me just say by way of preview, so that if you get lost in the details, perhaps this part of it will come out. And that is that the second beast is really a person or perhaps a corporate entity that exists within the land of Israel. Whereas the first beast rises from the sea and represents Rome, the second beast actually rises from the earth or from the land, and in this case it would be Palestine. That he is one who basically is operating under delegated authority. The first beast delegates his authority to this beast in order to enforce the first beast's rule in the land. Now, what that basically means is this, that if the first beast, as we've seen, is Rome and Nero, then this would be someone who acts on his authority to enforce his rule within the land of Israel. Okay, and he's also somebody who is represented to us, though, as a prophet who does the works of a prophet. In this case, he is later in the book of Revelation called the false prophet. Okay, so different things are attributed to him, different miracles, different signs, so that he causes the people in the land to worship the beast, who in this case is Nero. And as we know, during that time frame, the Caesars, as we saw last week, desired to be worshipped as kings. And so really, it all fits together. Now, there's the whole thing. I could just stop there and we could move on if I had prepared something further. But let's go on and review what we saw last week and then look at what I just said in a little more detail. Now, we've already seen that the first beast refers to two entities in the book of Revelation, to Rome collectively and to Nero individually. Remember Revelation 17, verses 9 through 10, that we haven't gotten to yet in the study on Revelation, gives us the key as to who the beast is. Here is the mind which has cisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings. 5 have fallen. 1 is, the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must remain a little while. Now, we saw that from the description of the beast plus the interpretation that we have here, that Rome fits the bill quite well, because Rome is the city built on 7 hills. Remember that the 7 heads are 7 mountains. The beast rises from the sea, as we saw earlier in chapter 13. Rome is west of Palestine. If you go very far west of Palestine, you run into the Mediterranean Sea. The Italian peninsula, of course, is extended into that sea. So from the perspective of Israel, it looks as though the beast rises from the sea. Rome has the power and the authority represented by the 10 horns and the 10 crowns. Remember, horns represent military might. Crowns obviously have to do with authority. Rome was a fierce nation that had, because the beast, of course, is represented as a fierce beast. That's why it's called a beast, and given the imagery that's used to describe it, of a leopard, of a bear, of a lion, and so forth, gives to it a sort of a ferociousness. Rome had world domination, and Rome certainly persecuted the saints. So everything that's true of the beast is true also of Rome. Rome also existed in John's day, and again, this is a key point to remember, as I mentioned already, that John says that the events that he's describing in the book of Revelation are near. Again, listen to chapter 1, verses 1 and 3. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show to his bondservants the things which must soon take place. Blessed is he who reads and those who hear the words of the prophecy and heed the things which are written in it, for the time is near. It certainly sounded like John intended for the 7 churches to listen to what he had to say, and you'll be blessed if you do, because if you're not ready for this when it comes, you're going to be in a lot of trouble, as those Jews who were trapped in Jerusalem and caught off guard by the war and so forth. And also heed the things which are written in it. So don't just hear it, but do it. Be ready for this. Okay, it wouldn't have much relevance to them if it was referring to events that took place or that will take place from their perspective over 2,000 years in the future. Now, Nero is the 6th of the Caesars of Rome. Remember what was said in Revelation 17:10 regarding the 7 heads. They are 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. When he comes, he must remain a little while. The first 5 had fallen, the first 5 Caesars, beginning with Julius, Augustus, Tiberius, Gaius, and Claudius, had fallen at this point in time, and the time frame in which we believe that John wrote this. The 6th is, who is Nero, And the seventh, when he came, would remain a little while, and that was Galba, who reigned for 6 months. We know that Nero, his character fits the beastly character of the beast. Obviously, he was a murderer who killed those who were closest to him that might threaten his power in some way, even family members, prominent citizens of Rome. He also enjoyed attacking slaves while dressing himself in lion's skin. There's a lot of other things about Nero we could talk about that obviously are not edifying. He was blasphemous, which is the beast is represented as having blasphemous names on his head. He had minted coins in which he resembled, or he made himself to resemble Apollo, which had these beams of the sun radiating from his face. And we saw an example of how he received the worship of others. People came and they worshipped him. That's what he required. Caesars believed themselves to be divine beings. Again, blasphemy. And his name in Hebrew adds up, interestingly, to 666. And we saw how that worked last time. Okay. He certainly exercised absolute sovereignty over his subjects. He persecuted the saints for 42 months after he blamed them for the fire that burned Rome. And when he committed suicide, it did seem through the Roman civil wars. Remember, there's several wars going on here, and this can get a little bit confusing. There is the war that Rome has with the Jews, and that's called the Jewish War. There's the Jewish civil war that was going on inside Jerusalem during the time that the siege was going on. And then there are the civil wars in Rome. So we don't want to get those confused. And those actually started when Nero committed suicide, because then there was a power struggle who was going to be the next Caesar. And you can see Galba won that struggle, but apparently he didn't win a decisive battle, and he was killed shortly after that. Okay, but when he committed suicide, when Nero committed suicide, it seems as though Rome was dead. Because of the civil wars going on, it was being torn apart from within, but Rome miraculously recovered. So the beast receives a mortal wound to one of its heads, which is Nero. It seems as though the beast is dead. As a matter of fact, we read several quotes last time that indicated from a historian's position that, and people who lived during that time frame, that Rome was finished. It looked like that was going to be the end of it. But then suddenly it pulls itself back together and is able to pursue that war with Israel and complete that, which we get to, actually we've already gotten to, we're backing up now in the book of Revelation to look at some of the characters that are involved in this warfare. Okay, were there any questions about the first beast? We'll launch into the second. Brian? Well, let me just say, to get the exact calculation, you'll need to look at the notes from last week. But what you do is his name can be spelled in different languages. The languages that are used during that time frame, and some of the languages, of course, would be Latin and Greek and so forth, and Hebrew. And in those days, they didn't have numerals. At least the numbers we have were not used. And if, for instance, in Israel, they would use the Hebrew letters for numbers. When Nero Caesar's name is spelled in Hebrew, Hebrew is all consonants, and each of those consonants has a numeric value. And his name has historically been spelled in Hebrew. And when you actually add up what those numerals calculate to, they add up to 666, which is interesting. As a matter of fact, a number of scholars believe that must be what John had in mind. Because look at verse 18 again. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, which means the beast is a man, and his number is 666. Okay, so it's basically a way that John could identify who it was he was referring to in his letter to the churches, and not just simply write his name in, which might have created some difficulty, I suppose, if that got out. Tom?
Does Gentry use Caesar Nero to come up with the 660?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? I realize this. We're going to get into. We're going to review a little bit of the mark of the beast and its meaning on the individual. We've already looked at that when we looked at the beast, but since the second beast actually enforces that, we'll just review that. Okay, so who is the second beast? Well, one thing that Gentry points out, and by the way, there are several resources to study this, and the interesting thing is that the deeper you delve into this to try to understand what all the different symbols mean, the more you find that there isn't a lot written on it. So I'm going with the best that I've had, and I even had to extrapolate in some areas, trying to follow along the lines of this kind of thinking to try to piece it together. So some of this comes from Gentry, some of this comes from Russell, Stuart Russell. Gentry, several different books by Gentry, and I think those are probably the main sources for this. Some of it, like I said, I just had to give an educated guess. Using, I think, what I'm learning as far as the interpretive principles that are being applied here. I mean, for instance, when we get to the part about fire from heaven and the image of the beast breathing life into it and so forth, one thing is that the author, I can't say that John did this, but this is the vision that Jesus gave to him. So Jesus does this basically, is using imagery from the Old Testament to make certain points. With regard to some of the judgments that were poured out, they represented the judgments of Egypt. The hail mixed with fire and darkness and so forth. And whether those things literally took place or whether it's just simply indicating that God is placing upon Israel the plagues of Egypt because they have fallen under the covenant curse, because the Lord warned them in the past that if they went after the idols of Egypt, God would add to them the curses that He placed upon Egypt, and that's what this is representing. So those kinds of things will be helpful to understand this. Okay, so who is the second beast? First of all, Gentry believes that Satan is presenting himself as sort of the anti-Trinity, sort of like the dark Trinity, as it were. God is a Trinity, and so he puts together his own Trinity, trying to mimic God. And the Trinity, of course, would be himself, the dragon, and secondly, the beast from the sea, and thirdly, the beast from the earth. So there's a trinity of characters that are involved in this battle against God's people in order to destroy them. And when I say God's people, as we go through this, we're going to have to remember, too, that God's people, He's bringing judgment on Old Testament Israel, and they have been called His people in the past. But the Lord is taking the kingdom from them and giving it to another nation, so Israel is no longer going to be the people of God, but now it's going to be the elect among the Jews and the Gentiles. So the war that Satan is waging is not against the Jewish people, but he's waging war against the church, or God's people now. Now, we've already been introduced to the dragon, and we've seen that he is Satan. We've been introduced to the first beast from the sea, and we've seen that that's Rome / Nero. Now, the second beast is shown also to be a part of this trinity, and he is one who parallels the first beast. We have one beast rising from the sea, and we have another one that comes out of the earth or from the land. And I've already given you a preview of that. The word land in Greek can mean the whole earth. It can be referring to certain lands within the world, but it can also refer to the land of Israel. And in the book of Revelation, it most often refers to that. So it's quite likely that this second beast arises from Israel or from Palestine. Now, both of them are obviously directly connected to Satan. Satan is the one who gives his authority to the first beast, and the second beast is said to speak like a dragon, and he actually functions under the authority of the first beast. So there is this hierarchy, and yet they all derive their authority from the dragon, from Satan. Now, both are represented as beasts because, again, of their ferocious character. But Gentry points out that quite often in the Bible, and again drawing from Old Testament imagery, the enemies of God's people are often represented as animals that destroy people, right? Destroy things. And one example is given in Daniel chapter 7, where we see 4 nations represented as 4 great beasts that come up from the sea. And of course, they don't just threaten God's people, Israel, they also threaten the other nations as well. Daniel said, "I was looking in my vision by night, And behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And again, winds, if it holds true in this vision as it does in others, is referring to the calamity that the Lord is going to bring because of these beasts. So 4 winds stirring up the great sea, and 4 great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. It's interesting that the first beast comes up from the sea. These 4 beasts also come up from the sea. And whether it means the same thing in this case or not, whether all of these, let's say, attacked Israel from the sea, isn't entirely clear. The first was like a lion and had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind also was given to it. And behold, another beast, the second one, resembling a bear. And it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And thus they said to it, Arise, devour much meat. After this I kept looking, and behold, another one, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Now that last beast is Rome, and it's the same beast that's being referred to in the book of Revelation. The beast that had the 4 heads, I believe, is referring to Alexander the Great, and after he died, I believe his kingdom was divided among 4 generals. So the correlation there with Greece is quite clear. The others had to do with other world-dominating powers that came before that. Now getting back to our text, the second beast comes up after the first, showing that he is subordinate to the first and lesser in power than the first. Notice that this beast only has 2 horns like a lamb, and as opposed to the beast's 10 horns. So 10 horns on the one beast, 2 on the second one, 2 like a lamb. In verse 12, we read that he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, which means that his authority comes from the first beast's authority. Okay, so the first beast is the one who is preeminent, and the second beast derives his authority from him. His role is subordinate to the first beast, as his mission is to draw attention to the first. Verse 12, And he makes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose fatal wound was healed. And the way he does this is through deceit, not surprisingly, because that is the way that Satan operates. Notice that he has 2 horns like a lamb, but he speaks as a dragon. Verse 14, And he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which it was given him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image of the beast who had the wound of the sword and has come to life. And of course, the second beast, along with the first, is contemporary with John. Now, those are some of the features that we've just gone through quickly that are mentioned in our text, Revelation 13, 11 through 18. Now I want us to look at a couple of interpretations as to who this beast might be. Now the first one is that of Stuart Russell. And Russell is the one, as I mentioned before, who was a radical preterist, who believed that Jesus Christ actually came in 70 A.D., there was the final resurrection and judgment and so forth. That view is obviously wrong. We would say it's actually heretical. Okay, but the person, Russell, who wrote that, did see some things that actually were right. And because he saw many of those things that were actually mentioned by Christ and the apostles as referring to AD 70, his work has become very important. As a matter of fact, if you're familiar with the book that R.C. Sproul wrote, The Last Days According to Jesus, you'll find that Sproul is actually interacting with that book by Russell throughout the whole work. So he sees there is a great deal of information in the book that is legitimate, but he would still, he would still draw the line and say, well, Christ's second coming hasn't taken place yet. That the Scripture talks about different comings of Christ. Stuart Russell lumps them all together, and he says that they're all in 70 A.D., but the moderate preterist says, well, some of those are referring to 70 A.D., but some of them are referring to the second coming at the end of time when the Lord, His work is finished, He's gathered in all His elect. That is still future. So that's what separates these two views. But Stuart Russell is the guy who represents this view. Now, Stuart Russell believed that the land beast was actually a local Roman procurator, which means he would be the local Roman authority. And he believes that he was actually one of two that existed during that time, both of which their character could be aptly described as that of a beast because of the damage they did to God's people. Gentry believes him to be something of a cross between Rome's political authority, since it is a delegated authority of the first beast to the second beast. But because of the different features of the second beast that seem to be religious, the idea that he's a false prophet, the idea that he's represented as having the horns of a lamb, the fact that he does things that would verify the work of a prophet, he believes it actually refers to a political entity under the subordination of Rome, which is also religious. In this case, it would be the Jewish high priestly hierarchy. Okay. Now, I'm going to get into some of those details, but I wanted you to see that up front. Which one it is I'm not entirely sure. But I think one or the other would probably work, and perhaps Gentry is correct here. There are some things that are ahead that I'm wondering how are going to work out if you take Gentry's view. But let's just go ahead and take a look at it and see what you think about it. First of all, Stuart Russell believes him to be the local Roman procurator or procurator. He rises from the land, which shows that he is domestic and not a foreign power, which would be something could be true of either. He has only two horns like a lamb, which shows his sphere of authority is smaller than that of the first beast. Okay, he doesn't have as much power and authority. He speaks as a dragon, which shows that he is crafty and deceitful. He is clothed with delegated authority from the first beast, which shows that he is an official representative of the beast. Either way, he derives his authority from the beast. He compels men to honor and worship the beast, something that the local Roman authority would do. Okay, now that of course, to a certain extent, not quite as overt as it was in the rest of the Roman Empire, and actually that's what led, I think, to the Jewish war with Rome, is when they tried to enforce that, because they found that the Jews would rather die than accept emperor worship. So there is tension here. And as a matter of fact, we're going to find if the harlot who sits on the beast, on the back of the beast, remember, is in fact Israel, is in fact Jerusalem, is in fact representing the Jewish people and the Jewish leaders, it shows that there is an involvement together. But then the beast turns on the woman and actually kills her and destroys her. And certainly we can see from what we believe, or at least what the moderate preterists believe that the book is about, that could very well represent the allegiance that is there, that we see actually taking place in this particular section where it talks about the relationship of the dragon, the first and the second beast. If the second beast is in fact the harlot as well, and the false prophet, that Rome eventually is going to turn against it and destroy it. And that's, again, what 70 AD is all about. Okay. Let's see. He seems to have miraculous powers, which points to his function as the false prophet of the beast. Now, it's possible that the Roman procurators, because they were enforcing the Roman law and the emperor worship, could be represented as the false prophet of the beast, as it were, again in this sort of anti-Trinitarian mirror image of the true Trinity, that this person functions like the prophet of the beast. He's the one who speaks his will, and he's the one who enforces his will. Certainly that could be true of the high priestly hierarchy as well. He rules with tyranny and cruelty, since he requires that all submit to the beast, and that was certainly true of the Roman authorities. He removes the civil rights of those who refuse to submit to the beast. Again, something that the Roman procurator would do. So Roman authority is certainly involved here, and it could be the local Roman authorities, the procurator that was there. Now, Ken Gentry, as I mentioned, sees it as something more of a cross between the political authority of Rome and the Jewish religious leaders. He sees the land beast as more than the Roman procurator, though he certainly has a connection with Rome. He also, though, has strong religious associations. I already mentioned he appears as a lamb, which was the dominant animal used in worship. And John later describes him as the false prophet. And false prophets, when you really stop to think about it, there were no false prophets outside of Israel and outside of the Jews. I suppose you might say that Balaam could possibly be one. But he was actually one chosen by God. That was at a time frame when, before the Lord had entirely excluded the true worship from everything outside of Israel. And we saw that in the history of redemption as we were going through that. There was overlap between the time that the Lord called Abraham out to be his, and to make his covenant with him, and to continue the work of redemption through his line. There was still the true worship of the true God going on outside. Job was a contemporary with Abraham, and he was certainly a very godly man. And Melchizedek, who was a priest of God, was not in Abraham's line. Abraham actually tithed to him, which means that priesthood was superior to the one that would come through Abraham. So there was still this worship of the true God going on around Israel, around, in this case, Abraham, even though the biblical history focuses on Abraham because God made his covenant with him. Eventually, all the rest of it died off, and it's possible that Balaam was still a part of that true worship of God going on. Somehow the Lord had developed a relationship with him. But once all of that had died off, the true prophets were only in Israel. Okay, I think we can safely say once Israel came into the land and the Lord raised up prophets in the land, that they were the only prophets. And if there was a false prophet, he would be among those people that were in the land. And so that point that Gentry is making here is the fact that John describes him as a false prophet means that this person is in the context of the covenant. In a sense that he is a part of God's people in a certain sense. And so you can see the connection he's making here, that if it's true that the allusion to a lamb and the allusion to the fact that he's a prophet is true, then this person has to be somehow connected with the worship of Israel. Okay, now Gentry believes that the second beast symbolizes, and this is what he says in his book, Navigating the Book of Revelation, apostate Judaism as concentrated in its religious leadership, in its high priestly aristocracy. What he means is, of course, the high priest, the line of priests, and so forth. Now, certainly it's true the temple and the priesthood were very influential in the governing of Israel along with Rome. Even though Rome had a political presence there, the people still were governed by the Sanhedrin. When the apostles were arrested, they were brought before the Sanhedrin. When Christ was arrested, he was put on trial before the high priest. There was still authority there, okay, that they were exercising. Richard Horsley writes this: the temple and high priesthood were the central and dominating political economic institutions of ancient Judea. Their religious dimension inseparable from their political economic function. The Torah, and that should be served, not service, the Torah served in effect as the constitution and law code of the temple state centered in Jerusalem. The Pharisees and other scribes/sages served a mediating political, economic, religious function in that Judean temple state. This guy almost writes like Meredith Kline, all these hyphenated words. But I hope you get the point there, that the temple and the authority that was there in the temple that was exercised by the priests was very influential both in the economy and in the government of Israel. Josephus indicates that there were two institutions that controlled Israel, the one belonging to the city itself, the other belonging to the temple. And those that could get them into their hands had the whole nation under their power. For without the command of them, it was not possible to offer their sacrifices, and to think of leaving on those sacrifices is to every Jew plainly impossible. Now, one thing that Gentry wants to point out here is that what we're looking at is we're looking at the dragon and the beast, both beasts, is that we've shifted really time frames from the earlier part of the book, which was talking about God's pouring out His judgment upon Israel for their rejection of the Messiah, what Jesus speaks about in Matthew chapter 24. And we've pulled back, as it were, from that scenario to describe some of the characters that actually exist here, to explain the relationship between the dragon, the sea beast, the land beast, who are in fact causing all this difficulty for Israel. In chapter 12, he backed up to show Satan's failure to destroy Christ. Remember, the dragon was waiting for the woman who was in labor to give birth and so forth. Then he moved over Christ's life and ministry to his ascension. The child was caught up and the dragon couldn't do anything about him and so forth. Then moving ahead to 70 A.D., he spoke of the Christian's flight to Pella, when he said that the woman fled into the wilderness, and then later the 2 wings were given to her to fly into the wilderness, where she was kept safe during that time frame. Now, the same thing is happening in chapter 13, where first of all he introduces us to the first evil beast. And in this beast and its persecution, it was given to the beast to persecute the saints for that time frame. It's basically backing up to a time frame still before AD 70 or 70 AD, when Nero, remember, he died in 68. But he was the one who initiated the war with the Jews. But before that happened, he began persecuting the Christians. So this is talking about Nero. It's talking about the Neronic persecution of the Christians. It's talking about the death of Nero. It's talking about the civil wars, the Roman civil wars that took place. All this is happening in chapter 13. Remember, one of the heads received a mortal wound. The beast looked like it was dead, but was raised again. That was the civil war. The beast that was the head that was killed, that was Nero. That was his death. That's 68. The civil wars take place after that. But before that, it was given into his hands to persecute the saints, and that's even before Nero kills himself. And so all of these things are taking place in a time frame before 70 A.D. Okay. Then it moves on. When it moves on then to verses 11 through 18, it's talking about the character of this land beast, who apparently may have existed before 70 A.D. And as a matter of fact, that's what Gentry is arguing. John is showing just simply the connection between the three: Satan, the beast, and it rises from the sea, and the land beast, the spiritual leaders of Israel. Now, one thing he points out to buttress this, and again, he's saying that the land beast is the Jewish priestly aristocracy. He says that John has already told and warned the 2 of the churches, in the letters to the 7 churches, in 2 of those letters, he actually identifies the Jews as being in league with Satan. Now, what he's saying here is that John is already pointing out there's a connection between the 2. But now when he gets to chapter 13, he's showing what that connection is. The dragon has the first beast has delegated authority in the second beast, but they're all tied to Satan. Now, consider what he says here in 2 of the letters to 2 of the churches. Revelation 2, verses 8 through 9. And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, the first and the last, who was dead and has come to life, says this: I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the blasphemy by those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. In case somebody wants to object to the fact that the land beast could be in league that the land beast who is in league with Satan is in fact the Jews and the Jewish leaders. John's pointing out earlier on that these men who say they are Jews are actually a synagogue of Satan. Can't get any stronger than that. And then we have the same thing in Revelation 3, verses 7 and 9. And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, behold, I will cause those of the synagogue of Satan, who say that they are Jews and are not, but lie, I will make them come and bow down at your feet and make them know that I have loved you. The true Jew, Paul tells us, is the one who is circumcised not in the foreskin of their flesh, but in their heart. These Jews say that they are Jews, but they're not acting like Jews. As a matter of fact, they have rejected the Messiah. They're trying to kill God's people. They are not Jews, but they are a synagogue of Satan. I hope you see the point there. So Gentry is saying that this land beast, who really represents this Jewish authority, is in league with Satan, and that shouldn't surprise us because that's exactly what they are. Jesus told the leaders in his day that you are of your father, the devil. Remember, they're a synagogue of Satan. They're not true Jews who would be true people of God. Okay, let's see. Where are we? Later he will represent this relationship as the harlot sitting on the beast and so forth. Rome is under the control of Satan. Okay. Now, let's get into a little bit more detail about what the land beast does. Where are we here? Okay. He exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence. He's aligned with the first beast and he derives his authority from him. Doesn't mean that he exercises all the authority of the beast. In other words, if, let's say, the Jewish priests are in mind here, and Nero is in fact the first beast, these Jewish leaders are not exercising all the authority of Nero, but they do exercise all of his authority in the particular thing that Nero delegates to them. Okay, it comes with all of Nero's authority. Okay, and in this case, it would be the destruction of the saints or enforcing the worship of the first beast. Now, that's a part that we have to think about for a little bit, and we are going to do that. Because did the Jewish leaders actually enforce worship of Rome? That was the one thing that the Jews were actually in tension over Rome about. So we'll have to see if there's any plausible way that could actually work. The dragon tried to, let's see, where are we? Okay. The dragon tries to destroy Christ, who is the woman, or faithful Israel, and went off to make war with the rest of her offspring. The beast, on the authority of the dragon, made war with the saints and overcame them. And this land beast, whoever he is, basically does the same thing. The dragon's purpose is to destroy the woman, to destroy the Christians. Couldn't destroy Christ, so now going after the Christians, Jesus said, don't be surprised if the world hates you, they hated me first, right? But the beast also was given to him to make war with the saints, and he was given authority over them. I think it was for a period of 42 months, and that's the exact time that Nero actually persecuted the Christians. But we also read that the land beast does exactly the same thing, and certainly the Jewish leaders did that. Verse 15, and it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast would even speak and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. The people who would not offer the worship to Caesar, who would not offer the pinch of incense and say Caesar is Lord, those would only be the Christians. Okay, so those who, and remember this is during the Neronic persecution, I think, those who were not willing to do that would be killed by this one. So his work is the same as the others, to try to destroy the woman, the faithful Israelites, those who are true Jews, those who are Christians. Now the land beast exercises his authority in his presence or in front of or by his authority to destroy Christ's people. Now the Jewish priestly class were certainly under Rome's authority. Josephus writes that the highest Jewish court, the Sanhedrin, could not convene without the consent of the Roman authorities. According to Josephus, the Roman procurator Albinus informed the Jews that it was not lawful for Ananus to assemble a Sanhedrin without his consent. And as a matter of fact, the Roman authorities in Palestine involved themselves in the appointing of the Jewish high priests. Probably wanted to get some puppet in there that could help enforce Rome's authority. But there were high priests, that should be plural, appointed by Herod the Great, Valerius Gratus, Herod of Chalcis, Vitellius, Tiberius Alexander, Agrippa the First and Second, and others, as Josephus tells us in the Antiquities of the Jews. Under Herod's rule of 33 years, no fewer than 7 high priests were appointed by Herod. In the brief reign of Agrippa, he deposed and installed high priests 3 times. So Rome, the local Roman procurator, had authority over who it is that would be high priest. And I imagine the reason why one was deposed and another was put in was either because of death, maybe because the Romans killed him, or it was because this high priest wasn't doing what I want him to do, so I'm going to put someone else in his place. Now, certainly the Jewish priests used Roman authority also when they attacked Christians. Certainly the Jewish priests tried to turn the Jewish people against Christians. They brought Christians also before Gentile tribunals on charges of having broken Roman or Gentile law. and tried to get the Gentiles themselves to bring the Christians to court. So in other words, the high priests, the priestly class, the Sanhedrin, used Rome's authority in order to persecute Christians. In Revelation 2:9, John tells us that the Jewish leaders were actually bringing false charges against Christians, and that's what is probably meant by blasphemy here. Jesus says to the church, I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the blasphemy by those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. He's in this case, he's not saying that, okay, you have tribulation, you have poverty, and I also know that these Jews over here are blaspheming me. But he's saying the tribulation, the poverty is coming from the Jews who are blaspheming you and who are basically bringing charges against you. The word blasphemy doesn't always refer to things that are said against God. It can refer to any slander or libel or charge brought against a person. I'm not sure how you pronounce that word. I always pronounce it lo, but it could be lu, I suppose. Lu or nida. It's a lexicon. They define blasphemy in this way. To speak against someone in such a way as to harm or injure his or her reputation. Occurring in relation to persons as well as to divine beings. To revile, to defame, to blaspheme, reviling. So you can see that the word has a broader application than just to God. I think sometimes we see the word blasphemy as just referring to words spoken against God. But in this case, the Jews are bringing charges against the Christians. So this is the idea of the second beast, who is persecuting those who don't worship the image. It's the persecution of the Jews against Christians. Okay. So basically, again, the merging of two forces, the Roman Empire and the apostate Jewish religious leaders. Now, secondly, the beast encourages false worship. In verse 12, he makes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose fatal wound was healed. Now, we might pause and say, is that what the Jewish high priests, the Jewish leaders, were actually attempting to do? Sounds like rather strong language. Well, there are some things they did do. Certainly, they didn't want God's people to worship the true God. We know that. Otherwise, when they saw Jesus, they saw the miracles that He did, the signs that He did. As we've been reminded of the series that Greg has been doing, He performed the signs of the Messiah. They had no question in their mind that this was, in fact, the Messiah. And the fact that they could know that and attribute to Him basically the fact that He was satanic, that He was doing this through satanic forces, that was the unpardonable sin. That they would attribute to something that was clearly the work of the Holy Spirit to Satan himself in all that clear light. So the Jewish leaders knew that Jesus was in fact the Messiah, but they did not want to receive Him as the Messiah, not surprisingly, because they were unconverted, because they were of their father the devil, because they wanted to maintain their position with Rome and therefore their position over the people. They loved authority. And we see some of that in some of these other verses here. John 11:47 through 50. Therefore, the chief priests and the Pharisees convened a council and were saying, what are we doing? For this man, Jesus, is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, all men will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, you know nothing at all, nor do you take into account that it is expedient for you that one man die for the people, and that the whole nation not perish. So again, the idea here is that they were actually trying to maintain their position. They were not really trying to enforce the worship of God at all. They may have said that. Jesus pointed out their hypocrisy on numerous occasions. Okay, there may have been some, of course, who were sincere, but none, of course, that rejected Christ who were sincere. There was a Nicodemus, and there was a Joseph of Arimathea among them, but for the most part, they were apostate. Again, I just put another note here. The relationship between the beast and the false prophet apparently is tenuous. Later, the beast will turn against the harlot and destroy her. So if the harlot and the false prophet, who is the second beast, are actually all the same, then the relationship that exists is not an altogether healthy one. Because, again, the beast is later going to devour the woman. Okay? All right. He exercises a prophetic role. Okay, is this Roman procurator or is this Jewish high priestly aristocracy? He performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down out of heaven to the earth in the presence of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which it was given him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who had the wound of the sword and has come to life. And it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast would even speak and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. Now, what's going on here? This is probably the most difficult part to understand, especially if you take it literally, if these things are actually taking place. Now, it's possible that they were, but it's also possible that they may just be pointing to the fact that this land beast, whoever he is a prophet of the beast. Okay? The signs represent certainly the credentials of a prophet. Can you think of anyone who called down fire from heaven in the Old Testament? Anyone remember his name? Okay, Elijah, right. And actually he did that on more than one occasion. There was the prophets of Baal that he didn't actually call down fire on them, but on the sacrifice that he had laid out. But there were also the men who came to take him afterwards. I forget now whether it was afterwards or before. Let's see. It was afterwards. Where he was sitting on top of a mountain and a captain came with his 50, I think it was, and they said, man of God, come down. And he says, if I'm a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and devour you. And that's what happened. And that happened again. And then the third one who came, I think it was the third one, said, please come down. Please let our lives be precious in your sight. Please don't destroy us. But come down. The king wants to talk to you. And the Lord says, go with this man. This man was humble, so go with him. But he was the one who called down fire from heaven, and and obviously, whenever the Lord did signs like this, it was to verify the fact that that person was actually his prophet or his spokesman. Now, these false signs and lying wonders that this beast does were to authenticate him as well, if they actually took place, or the imagery could just simply be indicating that he is seen as a prophet of this beast. In other words, like the judgment is poured out on Israel and it's represented as the Egyptian plagues. Doesn't necessarily mean that those particular plagues may have been laid on them, although they may have. It could just simply mean that the curse that was on Egypt is now upon Israel. In this case, the prophet may not have performed these things, but he is looked upon as a prophet. These are basically his credentials. That's the part I'm not entirely clear of, because we don't have any historical evidence that says that this literally took place. But we do have some things that are pretty close, excepting, of course, the fire. You think the fire is the image of the beast that speaks. That's something that we have to think about here in a minute. Okay. So, as Elijah calls down fire from heaven, the land beast is able to call down fire from heaven, and basically he's imitating a prophet of God. That's what false prophets do. They imitate the true prophets. Remember when the Lord was using Moses to call down the plagues upon Egypt, and how the Egyptian magicians were trying to imitate the same thing, and they were able to imitate it to a certain extent, but then couldn't go so far, and it was clear who the true prophet was. Well, this one is imitating a true prophet of God. He's trying to deceive the people into worshiping the beast. Okay? He makes an image of the beast, which would be Nero or Caesar, and makes it speak. Now, this isn't something that a true prophet did, but we might say that it represents, again, antithetical worship that he is advocating. He is advocating idolatry. And you remember how in the Scriptures it says, when the Lord is sort of rebuking those who worship idols, these idols have mouths but they can't speak, ears but they can't hear, and goes through this whole list of things. Well, this prophet actually is able to make the image speak. So he goes beyond. He is advocating idolatry. Okay? Now, what exactly is going on here? Did he actually make an image speak? It's possible. But it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. Again, it could just be pointing to his credentials as a prophet. Dean Millman writes, the image of the beast is clearly the statue of the emperor. And he adds, the test by which the martyrs were tried, that should be tried, not tired, was to adore the emperor, to offer incense before his statue, and to invoke the gods. Okay, we've already seen that if when the persecution against the Christians was brought, they were required to worship the emperor. But the ones that wouldn't do that were actually put to death. And there were some who did, who later repented or perhaps didn't repent, who gave in to this. But emperor worship was very clearly there. Dean Alford writes, the seer is now describing facts which history substantiates to us in their literal fulfillment. The image of Caesar was everywhere that which men were made to worship. It was before this that the Christian martyrs were brought to the test and put to death if they refused the act of adoration. If it be said, as an objection to this, that it is not an image of the emperor, but of the beast itself which is spoken of, the answer is very simple. That as the seer himself in chapter 17, verse 11, does not hesitate to identify one of the 7 kings with the beast itself, so we may fairly assume that the image of the beast for the time being would be the image of the reigning emperor. So it would be an image of Nero in this case. Another quote, Dean Howson writes, the image of the emperor was at that time under the empire the object of religious reverence. He was a deity on earth, and the worship paid to him was a real worship. It is a striking thought that in those times, setting aside the effete or feeble decadent forms of religion, the only 2 genuine worships in the civilized world were the worship of a Tiberius or a Nero on the one hand and the worship of Christ on the other. Basically, there were just these 2 forms of worship. Now, it is true that Rome allowed the Jews to continue their worship. That's something else that isn't taken into account of here, unless he groups that under Christian worship, but I doubt that he would. They were the ones who rejected Christ. So, again, is it going to be religious leaders or is it going to be the Roman procurator? Now, again, we don't know whether these signs were actually performed. They might just simply be images pointing to the beast's activities, his credentials as a false prophet. On the other hand, Jesus warned that this would happen in connection with the destruction of the temple in AD 70. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and will show great signs and wonders so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect. Matthew 24:24. So it's quite possible that these things actually did take place. Okay. Now, one last thing I want us to see is that the Jewish high priests actually did exercise a prophetic role. And it is interesting that these are called false. The land beast will later be called the false prophet. And false prophets, as I pointed out earlier, Gentry remarks, only exist within the context of the worship of Israel, of the covenant, the old covenant, so to speak. The Jewish high priests actually did prophesy. I quoted this before, but I didn't go quite to the end. But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all, nor do you take into account that it is expedient for you that one man die for the people, and that the whole nation not perish." Now he did not say this on his own initiative, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus was going to die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but in order that he might also gather together into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. It's interesting. The high priest prophesied, and he did that, because he was the high priest. He didn't say that on his own initiative. This wasn't something he thought of. This is something that God gave to him, even though Caiaphas didn't really understand what he was saying. He thought, we need to get rid of this guy so the Romans don't take our seat of power away from us. But what God meant by that was he had to die for the people to save many and to gather God's people together. But now they have this prophetic role, they have this prophetic office by virtue of the fact that he's high priest. Notice that his prophecy is attributed to the fact that he is the high priest. But rather than using his authority and his office and this prophetic gift to lead God's people to Christ, they were actually leading God's people to Rome, to submit to Rome so that the Romans don't destroy our nation. John chapter 19, verses 14 through 16. Now it was the day of the preparation for the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. And he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." So they cried out, away with him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So he then handed him over to them to be crucified. So again, the idea that the chief priests were not using their authority to lead people to God. As a matter of fact, they were leading people to Rome and rejecting God. When they rejected the Son, they rejected the Father as well. That's why they're a synagogue of Satan. That's why they're evil. And they're actually promoting, to this degree, emperor worship. We have no king but Caesar. They should have said, we have, of course, no king but the true God. And Christ is our king. Hand him over to us, But they didn't do that. Now, finally, he enforces submission to Rome so that no one can buy or sell without the required obedience to the beast, the Emperor Nero. Verses 16 and 17, we've already seen the interpretation of that, so this is just review. And he causes all, the small and the great, the rich and the poor, the free man and the slaves, to be given a mark on their right hand or their forehead, and he provides that no one will be able to buy or to sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. Again, the mark is not literal, even as the Lord, when he was reminding his people to take my law and put it upon your foreheads and have it upon the lintels of your house and to put it on your hand, what he meant was, don't forget my law. Don't forget submission to me. Don't forget your well-being is in submitting to me and following me. It was a sign of absolute submission to the lordship of God, and they were to show that submission. Actually, what happened was they showed their submission more by putting the phylacteries on and not obeying the laws that they actually represented. So they sort of took it literally and put those things on when they should have been putting them on their hearts and obeying and submitting to what it is that the Lord had told them to do. Well, the same thing is true in the case of this mark. It's a mark of ownership. It's a mark of submission, that they're called upon to submit to the emperor. And that's what the land beast is actually advocating here, that they submit to the authority of the Roman emperor. And if they don't submit to that, they're not able to buy or to sell, and their own life would be forfeit, which is, a matter of fact, what happened to the Christians who refused to worship Caesar and offer the pinch of incense. They were actually lost their lives. Okay. Now, that took a long time to figure out. I don't know if you have any questions on that. Does that... You begin to see, though, what's in the picture here. The big picture is simply this, that the dragon has given his authority to the first beast who rises from the sea, which is basically representing Nero in particular as an individual, Rome as a political entity. The second beast is actually operating under delegated authority. He rises from the land rather than from the sea. He is a domestic authority. That authority is either the Roman procurator or the Jewish high priestly aristocracy, which is a mixture of both Roman authority and Jewish authority. Okay? And the one thing that maybe leads us to go the other direction to the Jewish hierarchy is the fact that he's represented as a prophet. He's a false prophet. That takes place within a covenantal context, and he is also represented in a certain sense as a lamb. 2 horns as a lamb and so forth. And a lamb is certainly a sacrificial animal. I think that's pretty much it. So that's pretty much the nutshell. All of these were the details to try to bring that out and to buttress that. Any questions on that? Brian? There should be a couple there at the door. If not, you can download it or I can print a copy for you. There were a couple under the stack of the new ones out the door. Any questions or comments about this particular lesson? Okay, well then let's close with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you again for just the opportunity to be able to explore these different ideas, this interpretation